Okay, so hello and welcome to the How Not to Do API presentation. Together with Daniel, we'll show you anonymized real-life examples of all kinds of strange errors, anti-patterns, and quirks that add flavors to our daily work in Think, the integration with external APIs. I am Mateusz Pędzich. I am working in Think for a bit over 2 years now. I started in integration and I still work in integration. I started as a normal software engineer, but currently I held position as a tech lead, and together with me is Daniel.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Obrębski, and I had the similar path as Mateusz, but I joined Think in July last year. Yeah. I'm also the tech lead in one of the teams. With team covers 4 markets. We are making integrations. So basically, maybe a few words about Think. So basically, Think is one of the leaders in the open banking platform. We make products on top of the data we can fetch from the banks. We have more than 450 employees throughout whole Europe. Poland is our second biggest office. We have more than 80 engineers here. Also, our solutions are used by PayPal, Klarna, BNP, Santander, Nordea, and many, many more. We are also a member of advisory boards, and we are helping banks improving the quality of their open banking solutions. Basically, we cover more than 90% of banks across all 18 markets we cover in Europe. Potentially, we can reach to more than 260 million customers. Basically, you can see on the diagram that we are joining new markets every year, and this is like new opportunities and more development stuff for the engineers.
Yeah, but let's start maybe what open banking really is, because this is kind of important in this presentation and what we are doing. So there is a nice slide with text. Open banking is the exchange of data and services between financial institutions like banks and third-party providers like Think to deliver enhanced capabilities and experience to the market. Sounds pretty nice, right? What that means really, that bank needed to open their access to the data because they're regulated by European Union and in UK by some agency in UK. I don't remember the name exactly right now, but around 2 years ago, there was introduction of the PSD2 directive, which opened the APIs access in whole European Union. Deadline was 2 years ago. Of course, this started I think 5-6 years ago. And you probably noticed around 2 years ago that you needed to provide the second factor authentication during logging to your bank because this is required by the PSD2. So this is pretty good change. So in short, open banking is open access through API to your data, not closed only for banks like it was before. So one of the main parts of the open banking is Account Information Service, in short called AIS. As you can see on the slide, previously data from one bank was used only by this bank. But with open banking, fortunately, now everyone with proper license can access that. So this opened a lot of solutions, benefits, and possibilities, because you can easily build interesting app on the top of that. The second big part of open banking is payment initiation service. Before that, we could do payments with classic cards, debit, credit, or with traditional transfers. And I know that Poland is a bit special case because we have a lot of payment providers, but rest of Europe isn't advanced like that. So open banking is quite interesting solution that will improve a lot in that area. So with open banking, it's easy to create transfer directly from your bank without any middleman charging some extra fees. And the last thing that is really important when it comes to open banking in Europe especially is certificates. PSD2 requires that every TPP, so like Think, will have their own set of certificates called ADAS. And this is set of two certificates. One is used for transport and second is used for signing. So it's regulated, standardized, only dedicated issuers can provide these certificates, and they are known publicly. So, and this will be important later.
Yeah, so we made a brief introduction, and now we can move to the APA related considerations. So the purpose of this presentation. So yeah, first of all, why we are doing that presentation. Basing on our experiences reports, there is still a lot of APIs that not work as expected. We find only about 30% of APIs at least usable, which is really poor number. Yeah, the number of APIs are getting better, and this is also due to the fact that Tink is pushing and helping banks improving the API. However, many banks still are not willing to cooperate. However, it's changed. So to use the API, we need to register to the API. So there are multiple ways, mostly by the dev portals. Dev portals are portals which contains documentation and information about your configuration, secrets. Sometimes you can find information about the traffic. And so, yeah, basically you might think that, yeah, because Tink is financial institution and everything is standardized, so we have the ADAS, we can access API just like that. And the answer is no. Basically, I present you two examples of the registering to the portal to get the API. So first example is, yeah, we are registering the portal, requesting an access to API. We need to fill some specific form, and then we are waiting for an email. Once we get an email, we need to send the certificate. We could do that in the previous step, but yeah. Then we need to call some specific API, and then we can receive the secrets we can use to connect to the real API. Kind of sucks. And the second example is, yeah, also signing up, creating a new app, checking what products we want to use, and then filling a nice, decent PDF and signing it with ADAS, and then also getting an approval. And yeah, if everything works, we can pass further. But yeah, basically those processes is at least 2 weeks, so it's not working nice. So maybe we should do that by API. Yeah. So, no. Yeah. So yeah, it is a bit better because everything works. It should, if everything works, it should work straightforward. So yeah, we are sending that request, and then we should have an access to API. Yeah, but it doesn't look really nice. You need to send a big JSON with all certificates encoded, and it's really easy to make a mistake.
Yeah, and on the top of that, I would add that not every bank provides the dynamic client registration, as it's called. So sometimes we need to stick to developer portals only, sometimes even to emails. And here there is another example looking rather simple. The first thing you can notice is that we need to use put HTTP method to send a request, which is rather weird practice, as we know. The second thing is signature field in the body of the request. Why not use the headers? Yes, because these banks don't provide a good documentation, and they say that you need to use you need to sign the payload, which is standardized JSON. But what is the standardized JSON, and where the payload starts? With the bracket or with the text payload? We don't know, and there are no proper examples. So, and of course, the response is also a bit weird without any details. So pretty much ends like that, especially if we succeed.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned in one of the first slides about ADAS, we need to use it. It's regulated. And as every certificate, there is expiry date. And when it comes to the expiry date, I mean, someday you need to renew certificate. And we ask a lot of banks how we should proceed with the renewing certificates in open banking world. And as you can see on the slide, a lot of banks didn't answer at all. And if we got an answer, it looks like we need to make some action. So that's another possible point of failure. And, you know, sometimes it means registering up from the beginning, which, as you already know, it's sometimes pretty difficult.
Yeah, and it may cause some lack of our services, so we do not provide connection to that bank for some period of time because there is no valid certificates.
Continuity is important.
Yes. So what could be a solution here? Yeah, just enrolling with first request to the API. This is done in many ways, but basically all requests are already designed. Secured connection is established. ADAS is standardized. What banks should do is only to validate and trust our CA. So basically, make your API easily accessible for people. Don't complicate your life too much and save the time of the people.
Yeah, so now we finally registered our app. So we are going to the next step, which is authentication. But before that, let's take a look on the user perspective, how it looks like for the it should look like for the most of the users. So on the slide, you can see simple app-to-app flow, which you want to make a payment or connect to the bank. So you click on your app to connect. You are directed to the bank app. You log in with Face ID, fingerprint, or anything. You give consent and go back to your app. Simple, right? But in reality, sometimes it can look like that. On the slide, you can see 40 screens. And this is the whole journey to make one simple payment in one of the Italian banks. During this flow, you need to log into the bank 4 times. In the whole process, we need to exchange a lot of requests. We need to handle a lot of responses. There are a few callbacks, redirects. I mean, it's really complicated. Of course, this is the edge case, but Italy in that area is pretty special.
Yeah, that's right. And basically, because of that, we have like success rates on level 10-15% on Italy market. So that basically means that our products are unusable because of how our APIs works.
Yeah, I think I would stop on the 4th screen and say, no. Yeah, so, but why? We don't know either.
Yeah, and a few examples from the real API requests. So first of all, first example, don't encode your parameters. You just don't want to receive such responses or it messes with your code. The second one, post request with the query params. That could be just the GET request. We have only params. And the other main issue on the callbacks, and you can use it everywhere you want. So basically, main issue for us is that we are not receiving information, what happened. I mean, is it the user which put it in correct credentials? Is it an issue on our end? Maybe we send a bad request. Maybe user abandoned the flow. Maybe second factor flow was too complicated. We don't know that, and because of that, we cannot improve our products.
Yeah, and like to the callback, like not every bank is not doing callbacks on error, but I would say that 99% is not doing that. And what is important, we always send redirect URL to which bank should send a callback request. So why not use it also for the error responses? Because we are blind. We are redirecting the user to the bank page or bank app, and we don't know what is happening there. So why don't help us and just redirect back with some important information that, oh, you made requests wrong or something. I mean, help us here.
Yes. Also, do not reinvent the wheel. Use the standards, they are working. So on this slide, we have 2 examples of kind of bad behavior. So basically, returning accounts with token response makes the flows complicated. So why just not expose an account's endpoint? And if we call the account's endpoint, we get the accounts we have access to. Instead of that, we need to create specific logic which stores account numbers during the authentication process. Also, as I mentioned, do not reinvent the wheel. Do not extend standards, because you may notice that you have grant type exchange token and it messes with the OAuth2 standard. So do not reinvent the wheel. So next step, we authenticate it. We can get the data. So basically, most of the APIs returns everything in JSON format, which is nice, but yeah, there are a few issues with that. So here we have an example of also two bad things. This is a bit overcomplicated. So first one is that we want to get the data because we want to get transactions on the left and get account on the right. And we are sending the post requests. In fact, we want to get the data. So why not get? Also, the issue is that there is object request header, and basically all these parameters should be just in the real headers. Why to create such object? I don't know. And then if we delete that request header object, we can just pass everything as parameters, and it would work just like that. Also, we know pagination is necessary thing in most of the APIs, but please be cautious when you are sending mandatory fields, because it can end up with such situation when in the first request we need to set page ID equal to 0. What is more, we didn't have such information in the documentation, so we didn't know if it starts from 0 or maybe it is some other key. So yeah. Dividing one field to multiple fields, it's also an issue. So we are setting real number into integers. Why? Does it still people are struggling with dots and commas in fraction separator? I don't know that.
Yeah, and even if you need to do that for some reason, you could put it in one object that would look really nice in this JSON, because instead of long name, you would have one object which you could parse easily. You could like implement it on really multiple levels. I mean, there is a lot of better ways to do that, but in the end, maybe merge this to one field. That's it.
Yeah, also for our customers, most important information is often the transaction descriptions, also the categorization, because people want to know what is the category. Is there expenses? Is there, like, I don't know, Spotify, Netflix, and other stuff? And of course, we get information about categories rarely, so we need to have a logic that gets it from transaction descriptions. Here you have an example of two transactions, and as you may notice, there is no description field. There is some debtor name which corresponds to who sold us the product, or maybe who we sent the money. Also the creditor name, depending on the type of transaction, we have either this or this field. But basically we have also this stuff called remittance information unstructured, and you may notice that, yeah, it's really unstructured, and it's really hard to get such data. Why just not to expose the description? Yeah, we also have another example. We have like the PayPal and Amazon. Also, you may see that in this remittance information unstructured, there is a weird characters, and we don't know what to do that.
Yeah, and like some APIs provides the endpoints for getting transaction details, but let's assume that every user have around 2,000 transactions, and we would like to get this nice description from this endpoint. And that would mean that for every user, we would need to make additional 2,000 calls, and well, your API wouldn't be happy. But even if API provides such endpoint, in most cases, the description is not better at all. Yeah.
Okay, and this is an example of our code, the basic code before the enrichment process, which gets this categorization and other stuff. So basically, you may notice that, yeah, we can get as transaction description creditor name, debtor name, or this remittance information unstructured, and that also depends on the sign in transaction amount. So if it's greater than 0, then we are taking this. And what happens if the banks change the logic? Because, yeah, it happens, and they don't tell us about that. Why not? I think that basically this method should be just return description, and that's all. Also, yeah, we see that some APIs have like the bin fields. Why I mentioned that it's a bin field? Because in the documentation there is information that, yeah, there will be the aux data field, but you don't know what are the real parameters. And that's not the best idea to have parameters which are not undocumented. And because of that, we often need to release connections to production with some assumptions, because we can get real data only there and we can know what exactly happened.
Yeah, so if you really need to put something in your model, please document it, because like it will make your and our lives easier. So now let's move to another example, this time from UK. Not exactly anti-pattern, but I think it's kind of interesting case. So one of the UK banks provide a transaction endpoint in which you can ask for really, really old dates, and it will work. As you can see, I tried to see what transactions were done at the beginning of Poland, and there was none. But I will let you decide if this is good pattern or not to allow for such operation. Fortunately, these banks provide us the account creation date, so we know where to stop. But one easy mistake, and we could add with endless loop. Now we are moving to Spain. So one of the Spanish banks is trying to follow HEITOAS, which is kind of interesting, but there are some issues with that. They provide a lot of links, self, pairs, and other relations in their responses. And one day we suddenly started receiving a lot of 404s errors, and we didn't know why. So after checking the logs, we found out that suddenly the link to the next page of transaction changed. As you can see on the slide, in the first response, they added the additional value PSD22001. And as they were using HEITOAS, we adapted to it, so we are using the link they provided us. And this ended in the error because, well, user link was wrong. Of course, we could hard-coded it, but they used HEITOAS, so we adapted. What is also interesting that there is metadata, which is not really helpful. And then, again, Spain. As you already know, PSD2 introduced and requires SCA, strong customer authentication. This should be required during the authorization authentication part, and then you receive token, which is in most cases valid for 90 days. So there is one bank that don't ask for SCA during authentication sometimes, and even if they do, they can ask for SCA in the random point of time when you are fetching data. And we are doing something called background refreshes, and it can happen in middle of the night. So let's assume that you are happily sleeping, and suddenly you are receiving notification or message that you are trying to log into your bank, and please use notification or provide OTP somewhere. Like, pretty scary, right? And they don't want to cooperate on that, so it's pretty bad because we don't know to scare our users. Now we are moving to Sweden. So we are happily fetching transactions like page by page or date range by date range, and we are receiving nice JSON responses with list of transactions. But from one point of time, instead of nice JSON with list, we are receiving link. And so no more nice JSON response for you. Get this link, download zip file from it, and extract it, process it on your site. I mean, why not provide the JSON response with list of transactions? You were doing it before.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, don't complicate your API too much. Think of which parameters are really important. Think of use cases of your users. Document your API well. So the next topic we face, it's called data touching, and I will just show you what it means. So basically, we have two types of banks. So we have a bank A, which have multiple endpoints to fetch the data. For example, one endpoint for checking accounts, one endpoint for saving accounts, and third for the credit cards. Also, there is a type bank B, which have one endpoint for all the accounts. And that is an issue for us many times. So we have many products and not a lot of them requires all the data. So imagine the situation that, yeah, we want to fetch credit cards. We are calling the bank API, which gets us everything. And then we need to filter it somehow. And basically users often doesn't know about that. So they basically don't know what they are giving an access to, but yet this is our job just to get the data we need. With that comes also some other issue that banks often gets a field that, yeah, it's type of account, of course, and there is no information about documentation, what it can contain, what it doesn't contain. And often we also reach to the customer support and we sometimes face an issue. We will not tell you what's in that field. And basically what we need to do is to release the connection to production and check the possible values. But why just not to share that data in the documentation? So basically your API should return only the data which is needed. It can be a matter of security, privacy. We don't want to touch the data we don't want to. Also, returning a lot of data multiple times is a big cost, especially if you host the application in the cloud. One simple response can contain a lot of data which is not needed. Consider maybe GraphQL in your API. If your API returns a lot of data, maybe give an access to the user that he can choose what to get, because maybe the users needs only 10% of all the data.
Yeah, and now let's talk about standards, like who doesn't love them, yeah? And probably you can think, who are you to tell me how I should do my stuff, how I should implement the code? Yeah, but they are pretty useful. But okay, so in Europe, there are a few big open banking standards, such as UK Open Banking in UK and partially in Ireland, Berlin Group used in most of the Europe, STED mostly used in France, Polish API used in Poland. And there is also REDSys in Spain and SIPs in Portugal, which are not exactly standards, but they are just one API that providing access to multiple banks, but we can like put it together.
Yeah, basically standards are something good. Don't get us wrong, because yeah, it speeds up the job we do. So basically we are writing one connection, one integration, and we can connect to many banks. So that is good, but there are some drawbacks. And here we have an example from Poland. So basically this is part of our code. There is, I think, 14 or 15 flags, which are responsible for the flow in our code. So basically one of these flags means at least one if in our code. And that's bad because we have a standard. So why not to do the same in all the banks? I already mentioned the case about this page ID equal to 0, and yeah, here we have an example in our code that yeah, we need to handle that. Also, we have type of transactions. Basically, transaction date from and booking date from should be supported, but somehow if you send both of them to the bank, they are failing, and you need to set proper. So this is a weird logic in our code.
And now again, Spain. Like in one of the standards, it stated that you can fetch 2 years of transactions, but different banks think differently about what is 2 years, to be honest. So by default, we have interface that is implementing method all the transaction date. So by default, we are just doing -2, and it's working for most of the banks, but of course, there are some exceptions. So some banks think about 2 years as 23 months, some think about 24 months, some think about 2 years plus 1 day, and my favorite one, they don't think about this at all. They will just return 250 transactions. So if you do a lot of transactions in 1 week, you will just receive 1 week of transactions.
Yeah, basically, just simple tip, especially when you are following the standards. If the banks would use the JSON ignore properties, we would have like less than of these flags, because yeah, just ignore the fields which are in standard and you don't handle them.
Yeah, and if you really need to override some standard, please describe it really well in your documentation. Okay, so now errors. Errors happens, shit happens, right? But it would be nice to know what is happening, like really happening. So returning 500 for our wrongly created request or 400 for failures on the bank side is so common that we will not show you any examples of that because it's really common.
Yeah, so we gathered a few examples. So the first one is that we have an enrollment request. Request contained chain of certificates, which was compliant with the standard, and we were getting not extended internal server error. We raised a ticket in the bank, and they stated what you want to achieve. And yeah, after 3 weeks, you get information that we should send one certificate instead of chain, but it could be handled by the proper message. Request contained additional fields, which was covered by the standard, and we get an information that some other object has wrong structure. Also, a kind of related stuff to do these 2 years, but here we have a consent request, which is valid 90 days from today, and we are sending that date. Response from the bank was that we have invalid data, so we wrote to the support and got information and it turned out that 90 days are actually 89 days and 24 hours minus current hour. So for example, it could be 89 days and 2 hours. Also, we faced some weird errors, like the authorization server encountered an unexpected condition, and it was in 1 out of 10 requests. Also, here an example of just legitimate request for credit cards, and we are receiving 404, and we don't know why. Is it because user that doesn't have credit cards? Is it a temporary error? Or maybe it is some other case. Maybe the user is not the customer of the bank even. And also some other response, 400 bad request. We have a request ID, but it was a different request ID comparing to what we sent, and we still don't know the reason.
Yeah, and other example of strange error is returning HTML as a response, because I mean, HTML is kind of like XML, and what you just need to provide us the good error response with decent description, decent error code, and so on. What is interesting also in that case, that bank responded with HTTP code 200, which, as we all know, means that everything went okay. So we have a false positive message here.
Yeah, and then in HTML we have the access was denied, so 200 or access was denied. Yeah, another example, it was sending the second factor data, and we get a response. It was legitimate data, and yeah, format of certain request fields are not matching the requirements. First of all, we have one field, and the second one, why not to just show the format here? It would be an easier. Maybe of course we did something wrong, but it would be nice to have proper information here.
Yeah, and the best for the end, what happened here? No one knows, but judging God is looking at you. If I would guess, I think that we exceeded all this date here, but who can be sure with error like that? It's 500, so we could assume that is error on the bank side, but well, we don't know. Yeah, and this is how we look quite often in our work.
Yeah, so maybe a few not examples, few and not bad examples. So as we know, we are all keen on writing the clean code, but also think of writing the clean API, clean documentation. So here we have 4 examples. Yeah, we have nice information. We already know how to handle them. So for example, in the first one, we have that PSU IP address file field is not valid. The next one is that the expiration date has expired. We also know what to do with that. Account has no payment release. Okay, so we know we cannot do payment for it. And in the 4th one, we have that scope details is missing, but it's not required. It's not perfect because we have a mix of English and Polish, but at least we know what is missing, what we should do. Also remember to add the ID, so the support team can easily find the request, because yeah, in some cases we want to write to the support and ask what happened, and they need to find it, and if they have ID, it could be easily found. Also, good documentation and scenarios are a key to develop a good connection. Yeah, it is also important to share the bus scenarios also. Information, what happened in the bad cases, is really important for the customers because we can provide them some additional data. And of course, it will save time of your support team. So basically, try to respond with proper error messages and codes that are easy to understand. Describe all of them in the documentation. Create an ID with which you can easily find the request sent. It will save a lot of time of many people, because it's not only the developers people, also it's sometimes business, the support.
Yeah, and now let's move to some other stuff that we need to deal with in our daily work. So one of the cases is language. Like, we should think about English as a standard language in IT, but unfortunately, this is not the case. There is a lot of developer portals, a lot of documentation that is not documented at all in English. There is no possibility to use English. So, I mean, we can use translators, but it's sometimes risky, because during that process, you can translate something that shouldn't be translated.
Yeah, there are also APIs that itself, they are not in English. So the field names are in, for example, Norwegian or something else.
Yeah, so like, really, please stick to the English. It's our IT standard. The next thing is API support. We already mentioned a few times that we need to raise ticket to the support. So some of them think that if they will not respond, or they will take a really long time to respond, that means that there is no issue, no more. We forget about it, everything is fine. Well, fortunately, this is regulated, and PSD2 is on our side, but it's kind of irritating. So, I mean, we are people as well. We want to do our work well, so we understand that something is happening.
Yeah.
So please cooperate with us.
Yeah, and banks often state that, issue is not on our end, it's definitely on yours, and then you are ping-ponging with them, and after 2 weeks, it finally, it's on our end.
Yeah, you need to have some proof, unfortunately. Okay, and the other big topic really is sandbox environments. Like, when we are developing, it would be really good to use sandbox environment to test everything properly, to see how API is behaving, to implement everything according to documentation and so on. But the reality is that sandbox often is really different from production. Sometimes it's not working even, and there are cases that I mean, sandbox is completely different and it's not helpful at all. So if we find out that sandbox environment is really one-to-one copy of production, we look like Pikachu here.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's happening really, I mean, rarely.
Yeah. And basically it is an issue because that makes us testing on production somehow, because on the production API, we don't have any test users. We cannot test the cases. We need to have real users which are testing the API. And that is a big issue, because especially when we release the new connection, it is often unstable because we don't have many data.
Yeah, so also important is that sandboxes often provide decent transaction and account endpoint and so on, but the most difficult part in open banking is authorization and authentication. And if sandbox provide only hard-coded token, which is static, it is not helpful at all, because we cannot test it properly, and then our users are not happy because something is not covered. And now a short story about IPs being blocked. So as you may know or not, Tink is not using only open banking APIs, but as well something called direct access. So we can use the same API as mobile app of the bank. And one of banks decided that they don't want to allow us to use the direct access API, so they just blocked our IPs. And this resulted in blocking as well our open banking connection, which I would say is illegal, as we mentioned a few times, everything is regulated by the European Union. So, think about it, and we can say that direct access is legal. And the last part would be developer portals, also mentioned a few times during this presentation. It should be source of truth, but often it's not. Often data is outdated, there are some bugs, mistakes, sometimes it's really difficult even to register to the developer portal, or the documentation is lacking proper examples of explanations. So if you want to create developer portal, like user-friendly, developer-friendly, please apply to this success factor, which you can see on the slide.
Yeah, so how should I write the API in general? So the first and one of the main rules is just keep it simple, stupid. Accept and respond with the same format, so JSON for JSON. Share minimal necessary information, return proper meaningful error messages, codes and statuses, document your API, share the enums, use cases, possible values, use English, think what you set as mandatory field, make your calls traceable, name your fields properly and use English. Remember about security, monitor your API.
Yeah, and like as Daniel mentioned a few slides back, don't reinvent the wheel, because there is a lot of good standard like JWT or OAuth 2, which if you implement correctly, then everything will working really, really good. And again, how should I write the API in general? Maybe the most important rule, I would say, think of people who will be using your API, really, especially about us, developers, but also remember about the end user, because we don't try to be a bad people, bad guys here. We just want to do our work properly, and we are eager to help, but we need cooperation. And remember that someday you can be on the other side of the fence.
So yeah, API can't have a bug if there is no documentation.
Or API. We showed you a lot of things today, but this is just a tip of the iceberg. Our time is limited. I need to thank our colleagues in Ting that provide us some examples, which some of them we couldn't put in presentation because we would run out of the time. But before we finish, if you are interested how Ting works, you can visit demo.ting.com page. You can test our products, our connections here. There is even Polish market there.
Yeah, but still under development. So.
Yeah, still in beta. But yeah, so also if you are interested on open banking, you can visit our blog or LinkedIn page. You can even grab a coffee with us. Together with Daniel, we work quite often in the office in Hala Koszyki. And the most important, we are hiring not only to our domain, our area, but we have a lot of open positions for every level. So thank you, and back to the studio.